museum dedicated to the surgeons, doctors and anatomists who make up a large part of Edinburgh's rich history with the medical profession. It was an acclaimed surgeon who first came up with the idea to preserve all of Edinburgh's medical history in one place, Robert Knox, who agreed to donate much of his own personal collection on the grounds it would forever be displayed in the museum. This is Surgeons' Hall and the result of Robert Knox's work. However, Knox was also famous for another reason.
Well, like anyone running an anatomy school at that point, Knox had a bit of a problem in supply of bodies. The only legal way to get a body was through the executioner, and because we were executing less and less people, that's where the problem arose. So in common with pretty much every other anatomy school in the UK at that time, unfortunately the supply was fulfilled by body snatchers or grave robbers. He was certainly a renowned anatomist. He had written many articles and books. He was seen as a very renowned specialist in his field. He did have a lot of professional rivals. By all accounts, he wasn't the easiest man to get on with and had a certain arrogance to him. But there was constant infighting in the Edinburgh medical community at that point, and Knox was just part of that. But no, he was seen as a very serious scientist, and that's reflected in the fact that by the time of the Burke and Hare scandal, Knox was running the biggest anatomy school in the UK at that point, so he was certainly a very popular teacher.
But to maintain his lectures, Knox needed a steady supply of corpses, and so he accepted any bodies that showed up at his door. And so, in November 1827, he accepted a body from one William Hare, who was paid £7.10 for his work. Knox continued to accept corpses from Hare and Hare's associate Burke, and over the course of a year, Burke and Hare brought Edinburgh's most loved lecturer 16 bodies and were paid handsomely for each and every one.
Horror, disgust, you name it, I guess. The public were well aware that this was happening. You know, bodies were getting stolen from graveyards for anatomy schools, and they were appalled. You know, the idea that if you didn't have a Christian burial, you wouldn't reach heaven and so on because of the religious beliefs at the time. So for Knox to be then dragged into this case where it went so much further than that, where Burke and Hare go out and murder people to sell the bodies, the public were horrified, and so, you know, there were demonstrations in the street, there were angry mobs turning up at his house and so on, and stoning the windows. He stayed in Edinburgh for a good few years, at least about 10 years after this, but absolutely his reputation was very badly damaged, and the numbers of students attending these classes started to dwindle quite severely, and he ended up leaving Edinburgh in the 1840s.
This was the catalyst for Knox's downfall. His classes began to falter after Edinburgh University introduced their compulsory anatomy class, and the Anatomy Act 1832 passed due to the after effects of the Burke and Hare scandal. Knox was forced to close his school, and in 1844, the Royal Society effectively barred Robert from teaching after he was found guilty of forging documentation for a student.
How did the scandal contribute to the Anatomy Act 1832?
It had a very direct effect, because this was a massive news story even at the time in 1820, 1829 when this broke, and the general public were horrified. It was almost seen as Britain's first serial killer. He made very little public comment. I suspect that might be to do with that arrogance maybe I mentioned. He almost felt that it was beneath him, or he would just encourage the fuel if he added to the debate. So he kept his own counsel. There was an investigation, a commission set up in Edinburgh to look at his role, and although there was some major criticisms about how he ran his anatomy schools and in terms of his record keeping and so on, it wasn't found that he'd done any criminal wrongdoing.
Robert Knox was one of the most famous lecturers of his time, reduced to a footnote in the grisly tale of Burke and Hare. Was he the innocent anatomist many in the medical community say he was, an unwilling participant? Or was he an immoral, uncaring doctor, happy to go along for the steady supply of corpses? Either way, he cemented his place in one of the most famous chapters in Edinburgh's long, long history.